everybody, I'm Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is Dad. Maintaining and keeping, establishing effective fatherhood in an age of rudderless wimps, right? And we're just going to be talking a little bit more about topics hit on the last video and kind of just elaborating on some of those concepts about essentially the chain that connects one generation to another, right? That linkage that bonds all the human generations together in this one thing we're calling history, right? And, the story of our species, right? And there's many stories, but there's also one story that kind of unites them all. And very much this entire process is mediated by one very simple inner relationship, and that is the relationship between father and son, or father and daughter, mother and son, mother and daughter, basically parent and child, essentially, of that communion and communication of information and memes, essentially, in the modern connotation of, what the units of cognition and the values that we hold, and these are the things, it is in building in these values that we have led to the world that we live in today. And it's all, as always, it's never one, smooth curve upward, or far less a straight line. It's very much been a series of ups and downs and ups and downs. And, it's like the history of Bitcoin, but in history, there's way ups and there's way downs, maybe not as extreme as Bitcoin per se, but throughout history, there's numerous overlapping cycles in which these frequency patterns emerge. And, again, when we say the ancients were just a bunch of savages who didn't know anything, oh yeah, but they had a calendar system that spanned hundreds of thousands of years and had units of time down to like the millionth of a second, like a millionth of a microsecond, right? Just a bunch of savages, right? Surely just emerged from naked apes in the continent of Africa somewhere around, a few 10,000 years ago or whatnot. It's just ridiculous. There's so much complexity in our psyche and psychology, and we who think of ourselves, they who think of ourselves as animals, and just the atheists, the material computer crowd that think basically they're always analyzing their brain's own function and just marveling at how amazing it is, but it's valid in a sense, but they're always trying to reduce it to something materialistic and explainable in the current conventional realm. But it very much is an electric phenomenon. It very much is frequency patterns, destructive and constructive, overlapping to create variable results. And the more that we can just focus on doing predictable acts and activities and habits that create constructive interference patterns, is the more that we have a civilization that is advancing. We, on the collective scale, we see improvements. We see things getting better, and things getting built, and things getting fixed, and things just generally advancing in a positive direction. And then we have destructive frequency pattern overlays where, the frequency patterns cancel each other out. And so we have a reduction. This is, every form of destruction is, literally just using one form of matter and energy to cancel out another form of matter and energy. When we fire a $10,000 Patriot missile at, some, Iranian or Syrian, enemy military installation, this is literally millions and millions of dollars in energy and resources and capital just being fired at each other, and it blows up and basically both are destroyed, right? And in the context of warfare, that's desired, right? We want to have that destructive pattern. We're willing to sacrifice $10 million to destroy this one enemy piece of hardware, and to make sure that it poses no threat to us. Setting aside all the moral judgments and, real-world geopolitical analysis of that example, that's kind of just a good example of a deliberate destructive interference pattern. And, when we have, there's good, but not all parents are created equal, right? I think anybody would agree to that. That's a very plain sentiment. But what is it that defines a good parent from a bad parent? What makes a dad, for example, better or worse? Today is Isla Thunderslice, our first daughter. Today is her second birthday, and two rounds around the sun is for Isla, and she is just having a blast today, and it's great to see. And I've changed so much over the last few years, and it's very much associated with my rise into fatherhood. That itself correlated with, taking on more responsibility in my life and kind of becoming a father in the energetic sense before I became a father in the physical sense. And, back down in Long Beach, we, to tell, a little bit of a story, we almost had, a baby down there, and it didn't happen. But we realized that that's something that we wanted to do. And so, I realized we can't be here. We can't be here in this communist enclave of just, LGBT degeneracy. And, it's like, I will say one thing. I'll give credit to the gays in Long Beach. They drove out the revitalization of the downtown, and basically before it was the gangs, now it's the gays, and I'll take the gays over the gangs any day, right? I'd rather have a bunch of men walking down the street in short shorts than than people getting shot up in front of businesses, right? As much as I'm not really into either scenario, I think it's obvious to say that one is definably worse than the other. And so we even when we witness social degeneracy, it's like we got to see everything in context, but they often go together. There's a reason that the gay district and the gang district are usually in the same urban environments, the same cities. It's because if there's no constructive frequency pattern, if there's no general uniting culture around which everyone can unite and rally and contribute and participate, then what we have is just a bunch of random things that are canceling each other out, right? Again, a theft is, a destructive frequency pattern. It's essentially taking it from, one loses and the other gains, right? But ultimately, it's basically a destructive frequency pattern, because you would not have, gained, to gain something by producing it or purchasing it is more of a gain than it is to the person who steals it. Even if it has more utility, it's basically only serving as a consumption in that sense rather than an asset. That might be a little speculative and abstract, but I'm going to stick with it. Because the point is that you have to be willing to kind of just experiment with things as a man. You have to be willing to tinker with reality. You have to be willing to challenge and question everything that you're faced with. But you also have to, as a man who matures, into responsibility, you have to understand that there is such a thing as legitimate hierarchy. And you can't spend your entire life just running away from, actual hierarchical social institutions because, you think that it's fundamentally, antithetical to your nature and fundamentally illegitimate. Not all hierarchies are illegitimate. And, even the ones that I disagree with, right, of, political groups that I disagree with, for example, they still have their capacity to mobilize, which I respect. I respect my enemy in the sense of his capacity. You should never underestimate your enemy. The lay liberal is a moron, right? But the people who are controlling them are scientists of the human psyche. They have been doing this for thousands of years. But, as I've said multiple times, the really good ones are old and dying and very, very brittle at this point. And the younger generation has been subject to the same degeneration as, the rest of the population. And it has not borne well for their capacity. And so we're at a very unique time when we can flip the script, so to speak. We can use these frequency patterns to build up a new and strong society in alignment with those ancient and true values, right? Deep roots are not reached by the frost, as Tolkien would say. And we can also use destructive frequency patterns to correct some things that, shouldn't be the way that they are. And, whether we're successful is ultimately a matter of faith rather than of, scientific material validation. Because, what is the concept of morale, for example? In military conflicts, yes, there's the hardware, there's the manpower, there's the numbers, there's the technology. But what is it? What is morale, right? Maybe it doesn't matter as much today in the world of technological robot AI warfare. But in general, what is a absolutely major determining force of who prevails in a conflict is morale. And morale is just the attitude of the people who are fighting. right? A small group, history is replete with all of these examples of a small group that was totally united and perfect, but had a stronger morale and was ready for the fight and charged up and all together, all as one, and they prevailed over a much larger force that had a lower morale, even again, if the technology was mismatched. Like, morale really matters when multiple humans can act as one body. The force is greater than the sum of their parts, right? It is greater than if all of them were doing the same thing separately, because it moves as one body. And so those who, basically are fearful and trembling and waving in the wind, they will be crushed by the force that is, that moves with spirit. And again, that there's so many different aspects to motion and action and power and force, that really it's not just a matter of atoms smashing together. It's not just, mass and acceleration. There is very much an energetic frequency component. What is, and now we're getting into the world of laser technology, right? Where we're literally just using a coherent beam of light to melt steel, right? And use it like, the military is using like 20 kilowatt lasers now to destroy enemy targets, at the speed of light. And it costs like less than $1, like a couple dollars to fire the thing. Maybe I think it's less than $1, because you're basically just using electricity. And if you can generate electricity on site, then you're not expending munitions, right? The average munition is pretty expensive, especially on the scale of a battleship. Those are big bullets, so to speak. But the laser is the perfect example of the coherent beam, right? And it's that, again, what differs in the morale of a group, right, is the coherence of their frequency. And a high coherence, force will prevail over an even larger mass that has an incoherent field, right? And that is, so this is what we're really focusing on, and why, I refuse to just settle into the groove of any of the, the preset ideologies laid out before us, right? Whether it's, obviously the leftism and the neoliberalism on one side, just who have promoted Joe Biden because, basically they've apparently just got no better option and want to save Pete Buttplug for a future, election, and don't want to expend that munition, in the first round. But, it's funny because, my dad, for example, actually supports Joe Biden. He basically thinks, he's like, Joe Biden's not a very good candidate, but, the other guy's just a clown. It's like, it's funny because, the thing about guys in finance, right? Both my dad and Space Panther's dad are both in finance, and they disagree on many things, but we're united in one thing, that when you're in those professional classes, you're not allowed to basically speak the truth publicly. You're not allowed to, get political. You have to maintain your, appearance of neutrality for the sake of your profession, and for a lot of people that's true. But I've never really resonated with that. I think that it's important to be able to speak the truth. I think it's important to not have strings attached and hooks attached, to the point where you have to basically circumscribe your thoughts and actions and words because you're afraid of the backlash, against you. And if you have malintent, then you're hiding something, that other people wouldn't want you to be doing, right? But if you're of good intent, if you're of pure intent, then you should always be free to speak, right? The worst thing that can happen is you offend people with too much truth. And but that's not like John F. Kennedy, like the last good Democrat said, we are not afraid of enduring the American people with dangerous ideas and dangerous opinions. Basically, we will take the consequences of information, but we're not going to, basically limit ourselves and censor ourselves for the sake of people being offended. But of course, that was a long time ago. And again, that was back when, there were good Democrats, I guess, because the other side was, just rabidly militaristic and imperial. But, here in the eschaton at the end of the world, right, when the forces of Christ are coagulating and the armies of men controlled by Satan, they're all basically amassing as well. It's important to recognize recognize and remember the fundamental principles, and that's what that's what my dad taught me a lot of things, and we were very, provided for in terms of material values, right? But there was a certain spirituality that never really entered my life, right? They kind of told me to go to Sunday school, and I did that, but as I've mentioned, I basically stopped going when I was like in first grade, because I told my dad I was an atheist and I didn't believe in it, because I was learning like quantum physics in school, in elementary school. Again, when people come at me with like elementary and sophistic knowledge and say like, Mango, you just don't know about this, it's like, dude, like for real, like I knew about that when I was 12 years old. And, I try not to have too much hubris. I always try and keep myself in check and realize that there are people who are smarter than me. There are always people that I can learn from. Even people who are dumber than me I can learn from, because you still have to interact with people in this world. If you think you're so smart, but you still can't figure out how to basically, live without friction generally, and live without suffering and relieve your own suffering, then you're not very smart, right? I know a lot of smart people when I was growing up who would complain about, people are so dumb, and I always told them, like, I agree with you, people are so dumb, but you also got to ask yourself, if you're, if we're still saying this, as much as we are 10, 20 years from now, who's the dumb one, right? Are we dumb, or are they dumb? Because if you keep living amongst people who you have a destructive frequency pattern with, then there's no point, right? So this is where we get into kind of, the future of civilization, the resurgence of secession, the state of Jefferson, creating new zones, really embracing the right of people to form their own communities, even if they are explicitly based on race, right? It's nobody should be forced to do anything, but people should be allowed to form communities that resonate with them. If that means the black nationalists and the white nationalists get to form their own communities, it doesn't have to be a whole new state, but their own communities, and that should be a protected right. As long as there's no violence committed, you should be able, the Jews can have their communities, right? The Asians can have their communities, right? And we respect that right for all the other groups besides the white people today, the white Christian men specifically. But, we have to respect that for everyone. And the fact remains that this country was founded by, white conservative Christian men, and it has engendered more material prosperity than any other nation in the entire world. And it has been the source, historically, even with all the ups and downs, the source and the provider of more freedom. This continent has had more freedom. This country has had more freedom than any other country in the world. And, now basically the National Black Historical Museum, African American Historical Museum in DC is saying that hard work is, only a white value, and, rugged individualism and showing up on time and the nuclear family, these are all just white values that, we should all question in society. Again, this is critical theory, gone wild. And it's crazy, because if a white person said these things, they'd be accused of being a white supremacist. To say that white people have a claim on being on time and working hard and, all these other things, the nuclear family, which, obviously have been shared by many other cultures in the world, perhaps not in Africa, but definitely in Asia. And Tim Pool got very offended at this as a half Korean. He's like, I'm sorry, you think that, the Chinese empires 8,000 years ago, you think they didn't have the nuclear family? I mean, they weren't necessarily settling a new world like, Americans were and are. We are a pioneer nation. And you can't have a pioneer nation coexist with a nation of basically just couch potato, welfare consuming, just serfs. You have to breed strength in society. You have to really focus on the constructive frequency patterns and increase in the value of your own family and keeping it in the family, right? Again, how did the Jews get so wealthy? Keeping it in the family, right? Back when, black people and white people lived under segregation, right? It sounds so horrible now, but black people had their own black businesses, right? White people had their white businesses, but the point is that there was communities, and it was keeping it in the family. Again, I don't think we should be forced into that, but I think people shouldn't also be terrorized if they choose to keep it in the family and choose to associate with their own, including white people. I genuinely just get along better with people of, who are at least intelligent enough to have a conversation, but generally people of Celtic descent. I get along with them better than any other people. It's just a common theme, right? And, I don't think I'm an evil person for recognizing that I have Celtic blood in my body and my bones. And that's just the way it is. And I love my people, and I like myself. I love myself. I like being myself. I don't hate myself. I don't hate my family. I'm not going to teach my kids that they are bad people. I'm not going to teach them weakness and bullshit and lies. I'm not going to send them to public school, which pretty much, is redundant given all the things I just said previously. I'm going to teach my daughters and, my future children, sons and daughters, strength. I'm going to teach them how to interact in the world. I'm going to keep wealth in the family. I'm going to build generational wealth. And it's going to be beautiful. And we're going to have amazing, times and experiences as a family. And, in terms of material values, I definitely was raised with enough, without any irony, privilege to understand, a lot about the world from a material sense. But, I wasn't necessarily taught kind of the more refined energetic values. I wasn't taught spirituality. I wasn't taught, what I would consider to be the true religion. I wasn't taught, I wasn't taught how to fix a car. I wasn't taught how to shoot a gun. I wasn't taught, how to skin a buck. I wasn't taught a lot of, what would have been considered, old masculine values. But however, I did learn about finance and debate and rhetoric and, how to interact on a high level, and I do take to heart those values. It is a major part of my own success. But there's also, the other aspects that I had to teach myself, basically. It's funny, my dad came up to me a couple years ago. He's like, me and my brother, he's like, one thing I never told you guys is that I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. And, I never taught you guys how to shoot guns, but, I wish I had. And I was like, Dad, yeah, I've already got 2 guns. Like, I love to go shooting. He's like, what, really? It's, part of having a constructive frequency pattern is having an open line of communication with your kids, having trust with them. And, in a lot of ways I had that, in a lot of ways I didn't. And so there were reasons for me to withhold information, more from my dad than from my mom, because my mom would support me, at least back in those days. She would support me even when I got in trouble with the police. She was on my side unequivocally, whereas my dad was, on my side conditionally, or at least that's how it felt. And that's part of being a good dad. You can't be unconditionally supportive at all times. You again, like Jordan Peterson says, don't let your children do anything that would make you hate them, right? Keep them good people. Make them good people by the way you teach them. And you can't really, it's hard to correct the course when they're already gone far down a bad path. And that is why the public school system is so evil and at this point totally useless. There's literally no value proposition for the public schooling, and they've now basically rescinded funding for the homeschooling program in California and I think to charter schools as well. It's a full-on war. And they are coming for the nuclear family, as I said in my video a couple videos ago. Many people have said for a long time, but now also the National Museum of African American, museum, whatever, in DC is saying that the nuclear family is an example of a white supremism, and so we need to challenge the nuclear family, and we need to break it up, essentially, is the implicit claim, in order to challenge white supremism. Right, and that's not going to happen. And again, that's where you will face the phalanx, the shield wall of American conservative nationalists, and we will never budge and we will never break. I love the people in my county. I love the people at my farmer's market. Basically, these are the people, again, they might take the cities. As always, throughout history, imperial powers have centered in the cities, but they can never take the mountains, brother. And not in the Himalayas, not in the highlands of Scotland, and out here in the Sierra Nevadas and many other mountains throughout this continent and country. It's going to be the same thing. Come and take it. Molan Labe. And so that's my video today. Teach your children strength. Teach your children well. and they will love you, right? And that's it. You won't earn love by being weak. You won't earn love by being subservient to the mass culture. You will earn love by teaching your children well and giving them the tools and the values and the strengths to succeed in any condition, right? And, you know, as we move through the archetypes of the hero, the artist, the prophet, and the nomad, right? And the millennials, those of us who have, you know, still some balls between our legs, you know, we will be the ones to refine the hero archetype and bring the civilization back into a state of order and ascendancy. And so that's my video today. Hope you guys have a good weekend, and I will see you next time. And another happy birthday to my little girl, Isla Spring Thunderslice. And yeah, that's it. Hope you guys have a good one. I'll talk to you next time. Cheers.